People will create these emotional attacks of forest management. They'll go out to an area that's just been managed and they'll find a 6-inch rut with some water in it and take a picture of that. And then that will be their, their example of why forest management is wrong. Here at the Catamount Community Forest, here is like an example of forest management done with this really ecological forestry approach. We're managing for old growth attributes, we're managing for biodiversity, involved in this incredibly extensive public outreach process. And you could still come out here with a camera and take pictures of a lot of stuff and talk about how careless it is and how bad everything is, and everybody would believe you. The spring after you do forest management is when it usually looks the worst. Year 2, it'll probably start to green up a little bit. The 3rd year, we'll probably start to get raspberries and blackberries and some of this herbaceous plant diversity in the understory. And then really year 4 and year 5, we'll see this explosion of regeneration. It is just such a assumption that to manage a forest must be in some way taking something away from it. This is what I'm sort of expressing to all of these people who are seeing all this apparent, like devastation. This is actually like a more profound expression of compassion and ecological responsibility than just leaving this forest alone.
So this was toppled in a microburst, I believe. What it created was this beautiful early successional habitat. So these are sort of smaller trees. They're also different species. They're species that do really well in the sun. So you have paper birch and pin cherry, and let's see, white ash, and what else am I seeing in here? Lots of, striped maple. You have the rubus species, so those are the blackberries and raspberries. So the sort of shrub layer comes in, and this is great for wildlife habitat. It breaks up the canopy, so you get diversity in the forest horizontally. So, this forest is very different from the forest right behind us or the forest over there. So it creates this mosaic of different conditions, which promotes biodiversity and resilience.
When you look at a job that's just been harvested, it might not be the most beautiful thing, but in the next year or two, you go back and look and you got deer in there eating on the berry bushes, you got rabbits under the treetops. I mean, things are happening there that weren't happening there before.
A young forest sequester way more than an older forest.
In certain parts of Vermont, we have very little young forest. Less than 1% of the forests in southern Vermont are in what we would consider to be a young forest condition.
And now we're in year 3 after the harvest, and some of these trees are 10 feet tall. Bear and deer and every kind of creature will use this habitat.
From the point of view of a moose, from the point of view of a snowshoe hare or a cottontail rabbit.
Everything in the world eats rabbits. And if they can't live in the woods, you're not going to have any of the other wildlife that people want to go take pictures of.
Young forest conditions are providing essential sources of food for all of those animals.
We walked through a mature forest to get to this young forest, but it kind of, represents the interconnectedness of nature, right? Like we classify the northern goshawk as an old forest dependent species, but its primary prey is ruffed grouse, which is a young forest dependent species. So you can't have one without the other.
Forestry and the myriad of forest conditions that result from these thoughtful actions of landowners to manage and take care of their forests provide this essential diversity of age classes and structural conditions that are essential for wildlife. You have to have the full spectrum in order to meet all of the needs of all of the birds and mammals and reptiles and amphibians that we have.
2 million plus acres is well managed. And we've got more wildlife species than most other states.
We need lots of acres with seedling saplings that are robust, healthy, vigorous populations. If we're all a bunch of, 50, 60-year-old people living in a community with no young people, there's going to be problems.
Right now, Vermont has lots of mid-aged forests. And from an ecological and biodiversity standpoint, those are not as rich as some of the younger forest conditions or the older forest conditions. We need to be able to figure out a better balance point between all of these various forest age classes.
Vermont made wooden products are second to none. It's one of the most iconic American brands, and you can feel good about buying them. You know, for the most part, you could point to the place on the map where the tree was cut. So much of what is that Vermont brand is our forests and what comes out of our forests.
Our forests are vital to what Vermont is. They provide habitat, they sequester carbon, they provide clean water and clean air, and they also produce wood that we use in our everyday lives, whether it's our buildings or to heat ourselves or the products that we use. Forests are essential, and to have those products and the benefits that our forests provide, we owe a debt of gratitude to the landowners and the foresters and the loggers who work in those woods.
Trees are the quintessential renewable natural resource.
Well, just go outside for a minute. Look up at the trees, look down at the flowers, see what your neighbors have done to their flower garden.
It may not look as pleasant right now, but when I get all done and clean this up, 2, 3, 5 years from now, it's going to be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
Vermont, New England, the Northeast has a long history of forestry and timber management. It's been an important part of our rural working landscape. It's been an important contributor to our working lands economies, and it's had a lot of benefits for conservation.
The overwhelming majority of the forestry work that takes place in Vermont is done responsibly, sustainably, with a lot of thought to the impact on the landscape, on the forest, on the wildlife, on the trees.
Nobody cares more about the environment than the people who earn their living by growing and harvesting trees.
Anybody who cares about forests deserves a seat at the table.
Any big conversation is going to start by listening.
Everybody's voice matters, and whether you do that by calling your legislator or raising your hand to serve for office in your own community or just showing up to vote, it is up to all of us to create the future of Vermont that we want.
Timber harvesting is sustainable in Vermont.
And if we value those forests, we need to value the whole system, the whole forest economy that supports them.
It's critical that our voters understand what's going on around them in rural Vermont.
A lot of times, the narrative that seems like it makes the most sense when you hear it is not going to be the one that's true.
We're not going to let our communities be ignored anymore. We're going to advocate for what we need. We're going to tell our stories, and we're going to be a part of figuring out how to make a Vermont that works for everybody.
Can you imagine a local renewable resource that contributes positively to our local economies and our working landscape, and that can be harvested while we help an ecosystem heal? And what could be better than that?